in this tutorial, we'll be looking at how to implement token authentication in your Django Restframework application, right? So you can see what we are going to build here. We are testing with Postman. So if you come here and enter a username, let's say the username is test1 and then password, then your Gmail, your phone number. We are using phone number here because we'll be using a custom Django model, Django authentication model. Now, if you send this, right, the user is created, you get your token here. If you come to login, if you copy these credentials and come to login, you copy these credentials, come to login and also send these credentials. You also log in as a user. You also log in as a user. You can get your token right here. You can see when you don't pass in a token, you get invalid token. Authentication credentials were not provided. When you pass in a token, when you pass in your token, which you just copied, you can see logged in as a user with this email, which is the user's email, right? So this is what we'll be looking at in this tutorial, and we'll move on to our text editor to see how we implement that. So obviously, the first thing you have to do is to create your project and have it opened on your favorite code editor, right? I have my project here created and I have it opened on VS Code, right? So what we'll be doing, like we'll be using a custom user model, right? So if you don't know how to create a custom authentication user model for your Django application, I just made a tutorial, was it 2 days ago, on using custom user model in Django. So I'll leave a link to that tutorial so that you can just look at it and come back here, right? So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using a custom user model for our token authentication in Django Restframework, right? So first things first, we are going to install Django. We have Django installed already because this is a project I already created. So we are going to install, for you, if you are starting the project newly, you are going to install Django, then Django Restframework, right? Because we need Django and Django Restframework, yeah? So we say pip install Django Rest Framework, right? So if you say pip install Django Rest Framework, Django will install, pip will install Django Rest Framework on your project, right? So after doing that, you go to your application settings.py so that we can add Django Rest Framework to your installed applications list, right? So this is this users app here we just created for the custom users model. Again, guys, if you don't know how to create a custom user model in Django, I'll leave a link in the description where we created that. Please go and look at it so that you can follow up with what I'm going to discuss here, right? So to this list, we are going to add REST framework, yeah. Then because we are using REST frameworks authentication, right? So we are also going to add another one, REST framework dot auth token, right? So this app right here is an app that comes by default to in Django Rest Framework, right? So you have to indicate it here because it has models that it will also install. So after doing this, we have to rerun our migrations, right? So that the migration for Django Rest Framework and Django Rest Framework auth token will be committed to the database, right? So we say Python manage.py migrate, right? So this will add the migrations for, sorry, I need a comma here. So this will add the migrations for I didn't save this guy. So if you do that and migrate, hopefully this works now. So this will mark, sorry for the mess up. So this will add the migrations to your database, right? So the migration for REST framework and REST framework auth token to the database, right? So that's with that. Now the next thing we are going to do is come to our users app, right? So this app will be where we have all our login, registration, and so we are going to test. We are going to have like 3 endpoints, right? So the first one will be for login, right? The first one will be for registration, right? The next one will be for testing our token, right? So thinking about it also, we are going to have a logout endpoint, right? So what we are going to do, we come to the views, right? So we create, or firstly, let's create our serializers, right? So we say serializers.py, right? So what are serializers? Serializers are just files. They are just classes that helps you pass Django models to the front end, right? It helps you to serialize your models, which are Python classes, and send them to the front end, right? So if you don't know about serializers, I also leave a link to a tutorial where we discuss Django serializer, Django Restframework serializer, right? So what we are going to do here is we say from Restframework we import serializers, then from our models we import user, right? So now we create the serializer, we call it user serializer, right? So this we inherit from serializer the model serializer, then we say class meta, then we say model here is equal to user, and fields will be equal to, this should be a list where we have id, username. Now let's go to our model to see the fields. So like I mentioned, this is a custom field right here. So you can see that we have phone number here because it's custom. Django normal authentication models does not come with the phone number, right? So because it's custom authentication model, that's why we're able to add phone number here. So we have phone number, email, username, right? So these are the fields that we basically need to work with, right? So we add phone number here, phone number, and we also add email, right? So these are the fields that we need, right? So what we also need the password field. So password, right? So in the password, if we leave this serializer as it is now, or maybe we just do the process and we come back to this, right? We come back to this password. That is something that we need to do to this password field right here, right? So but we'll come back to this after we have created our endpoints and other things, right? So this is our serializer done, right? So we come to our views. I will import some models up the top that I think we need, right? So we need our serializer. Obviously we import user serializer, then we say from REST framework we need some things. Import response, import the response class. Then what else? From REST framework, let's import the status. We import status, right? So what else? From Django.shortcuts we also import get object or 404, right? So what else? Maybe let's just continue. We think of what we need in the future, right? So let's create the APIs that we need now, the API classes that we need. The first one will be the login view, right? Let's also import the API view from Django, from REST framework. Sorry, this comes from REST framework. From REST framework views, we import the API view, right? So this will inherit from API view. Post request, self request, right? So again, if you don't know about API views, I'll also leave a link in the description where we discuss API views in Django REST framework, right? I'll leave a link to our whole Django REST framework playlist. Maybe if you don't really know about Django REST framework and you're just coming into this video, I'll leave a link in the description for the Django Restframework playlist so that I just go through it and understand everything, right? So then we also need our registration. Let's just copy this. Let's call this registration view, right? Then we need our test view. That's the view where we'll be testing the token, our login process, right? So these are the views we need. We go to our, let's create a URL here, urls.py, right? Then let's import from .views. Let's import all the view classes we just made. And the first one should be login view, registration view, and test view, right? Let's create a URL pattern here, and it should be a list where we say parts. Let's also import this part from Django.urls to import parts, right? So we can simply, this URL, what we are doing now, we can simply do it in the URL files, in our default URL files that comes with our application, right? But I want to, like, how I work personally on my projects while I work, right? How I work personally with Django is that I use different url.py files for different applications of my project, right? So for this user application, I create a url.py file, create a serializers.py file, and utils.py file, right? That's how I organize my applications, right? So for this url.py file, we'll add it to this URL that comes by default with Django, right? If you understand what I'm saying. So we come here and say import include here, include, right? Then we say this part will be users slash, then we say include users the URLs, right? So what does this mean? This means that anytime we want to access URLs from this URL file, we need to go to slash users slash, right, for us to use URLs here, right? So we say for login we say this will be the login view, then as view because it's a class, then we name this as login user. Then let me copy this down. So this will be for register. We change this to register. Then this will be for test. Then we change this to test view, right? So these are our URLs created out for us. Then let me just cross-check to make sure everything will work as expected. URLs pattern, then our views, right? So let's just see everything. Now we come to the meat of the tutorial, right? So we'll start from the registration view, right, where you create the user, right? So if we come here, we say we'll get, what we have to do is we have imported our serializer. So let's say data is equal to request.data, right? So request.data is just everything you are sending to this API. So if we want to get, maybe you are sending usernames to this API, you can see .get username, right? Because this is a dictionary. Request.data is a dictionary, right? So this is the whole information, the email, the username, the password that we have been sent, that we receive from the front end, right? So this is a dictionary that contains it, right? So we say serializer is equal to the user serializer, we pass in data is equal to data, right? So we want to create a user instance, right? So we pass in this data is equal to data. Then we say if serializer dot is valid, right? So we check if this serializers is valid. We say serializer, we say user is equal to serializer dot save, right? So we save to the database, right? So after this, you know that you know that right now we are receiving password, right? But our password cannot be saved as a string. Our password needs to be hashed, right? So what we do now is that we get the instance of the user that has been saved, right? The instance of this user that has been saved. The instead of let's just remove this user here so that we can initialize it. So we get the instance of this user that has been saved and we update its password. Look at what I'm trying to say here. We say user is equal to user dot objects dot get where username is equal to data dot get username, right? So let's import user from our users model, right? So we say we get after saving this, right? The user has been saved to the database, right? With the normal password, with the maybe let's say our password is test123, right? So the user will be saved with the normal password. Now what we are going to do here is that we are going to override the password with the hashed password, right? So what we are going to say here is we say user dot set password. This a user instance, the authentication user that are using for your project, we have the set password, right? So this set password is used to hash your password and set it for you, right? So we are going to pass in the password we want to set. We say data dot get password, right? The password that we are sent. Let me just increase my font here so that I don't know if you guys can see my screen very well. I can see my fonts very well, right? So yeah, so let me make this 70, right? Yeah, so that it's a little bit bolder. And let me close this also and maybe close this, right? So the password that we hash, then we say user dot save, right? So that we can save the user. So at this point right now, we are hashing the user's password, right? So that it cannot be a string password, something like that, right? So the next thing will be now we have to send our response, right? Now send response, right? We want to send our response, create the token and send our response. Let's say right here we say create token, right? Then we send our response, right? So how do we create the token? Now to create the token, let's say token is equal to token dot objects dot create, right? So where do we get this token from? Let me see if this will import it by default or me. So it doesn't, right? So where do we get this token from? So we say from rest framework dot auth token dot models we import token, right? So this token is just like I said, the authentication model, the REST framework authentication model comes, the REST framework auth token comes with a model, right? So this is an instance of the model it comes with. So this model is the model that houses our our token, right? So if we come here and say token, then we pass in the user is equal to user, right? So that's for that, right? So we have created the token right here. Now we send our response. We say return response. This is why we imported the response data. So we import this and we say user. The user instance is this serializer dot data, while the token is equal to token dot key. Yeah. So this token, we create the token right here, we send the response right here, the token itself, right? So remember this will return a class, right, that contains token. I think it contains the user instance, reference to the user instance, and it contains the key. Now this key is the token itself, right? So this will happen when the serializer is valid. What if the serializer is not valid? Let's just say return response of, let's say, data, then let's say message user was not created, right? So let's also return a response code here, a response code of 201, right? 201 is created, right? So created, right? So I always recommend, you can obviously leave out the status code, returning a status code, but I always recommend status code. Again, guys, everything I do here is like how I work personally on my projects with Django, right? So everything I do here, I'm teaching you things that will probably work, most probably work in production environments, right? So after returning, let's also return a status code here. Status is equal to status dot, this is a 400, of course, client error, bad request, right? So this is our user creation view done for us, right? Obviously we are going to test. Now this is the user creation done. Then let's go over to the login, right? So if we go to login, let's also get the data, request dot data, right? So now first thing, what we do want to do in login, we want to get the user, check the user's password. If it's correct, we return the user, we return a response which will contain the user instance and their token, right? So we'll get the data right here, and now let's get the user is equal to that. Then we say, you know that the username might be wrong, right? The username might be wrong, the password might be wrong, right? So that's why we imported this get object of 404, right? So what does get object of 404 do? Get object of 404 checks parameters passed into it, checks if we can get the instance of the model we're passing, and if we can get that instance, it will return it. If it doesn't get that instance, it will throw a 404, right? So let's say user, right? Then we say username is equal to request dot no, let's say data, we have already gotten the request dot username. So what does this mean? This means that get object of 404, get this user object, comparing it to this condition passed in here, where the user is equal to data dot get user with this username, right? That we are passing from the front end, right? So if we get the user, if it gets the user, it will continue the process. If it doesn't get the user, it will throw a 404, right? A 404, which is client error, right? So after that, we say user dot check password, right? Then we pass in the data dot get password, right? So this is just like we have set password, just like we have set password here, we also have check password. So this will check if the password you passed in here, of course you know that what you just did here is trying to hash the password, right? That's what we just did here, right? So that's what we just did here, right? We hashed the password here, right? So since we hashed the password, it's not a string per se, it's not a string, it's not the normal string that we saved as a password. Of course, this is a security measure, right? So we have to also check, because we can't use maybe equality, let's say equality, to check if the password is equal to the password that is passed in, because it's hashed, if you understand what I mean, right? So this will return a boolean, true if the password is correct, false if the password is not correct, right? So if it returns true here, let me just add pass here. So if it returns true, the password is correct. If it's false, the password is not correct. So let me return a response here. This says user password is not correct. Obviously, return response of data, and have message and say user password is not correct, right? Then we'll obviously return the status code, just like I recommend. Status equal to status dot 400 or so, 400, right? So at this point, when we get to this point, when this code get to this point, the user exists, the password is correct. Now we want to get the token, return the user instance, right? So let me just create response, right, and say that fine, right, and say user is equal to user serializer. We pass in this user, we get the data from it. Guys, if you don't know about serializers, please, and please go and check out the video we have on serializers. If you don't know about Django Restframework, I don't think you need to continue with this video. In fact, right? I don't know why you clicked. So if you don't know about Django Restframework, a link will be in the description that will take you to the Django Restframework tutorials. Everything is updated, everything is correct. Just go and check it and start developing APIs in Django. Please, guys. Right? So if you obviously know what you're doing, let's just continue. Right? So this is the user instance here. Now we want to return the token. Right? So let's say token. Right? So how do we get the token? We say here token is equal to the token instance dot objects dot get or create, right? User is equal to user, right? So this way, right? So what are we trying to do here? This is a security measure. This is how I do it. Again, this is how I do it, and this is how I recommend you do it, right? Get or create. I don't know because if you check here, if you check from our code here, the user gets created and an instance of a token is assigned to him, right? So, but I personally like to use get or create in case for any reason the token is not created here, which it should. I don't know why it shouldn't. So for any reason, if the token is not created here, we create it. If it is created, it returns the instance of the token. Then we say token again dot key, right? So this is it, just like before. So I come here and say status is equal to status dot 200, right? So registration API done, login API done. Let's go to the test API, right? So test API. Now, what do you want to do in test API? You want to make sure that the token is correct and want to be able to retrieve the user that it is logged in, right? The user that is trying to access this API. Or what we are going to do, what I suggest we do is that we test out our registration API and our login API now. Let's just test out the registration API and our login API. Let's just test it out, then we'll come back to this test API, right? So if we come to the URL, this is it, this will take us here. So let me save everything, right? Go to my terminal and I'll start the application. Python manage.py run server. Right, let me start my server here. So it has started. Let me just copy this. Now, if you have been following, you know that I'm a Postman fanboy. This Postman that I use for every API I'm testing. You don't know about Postman, it's just a client. Postman client is just like software that you use to test out your APIs, right? So if you come here, you enter the URL of the API you want to send. You come to the body, enter the JSON that you want to send and stuff like that, right? So I think we also have a tutorial on using Postman, right, for Django developers. So if we do, I'll also leave a link to the tutorial in the description. If you want me to create a tutorial on Postman, how to use Postman as a Django API developer, also leave a comment for me, like and subscribe. Yeah. So if we come to our URLs, then the URL should be, if we come here, you know that for us to access these URLs in these URLs here, you have to go to users/login for login, user/register, user/test, right? So let's first of all test the registration, right? So if you come here, copy this and go here and say users/register/, right? So let me change this to post, right? Because I'm making a post request here. So let me change this to post, right? Then let's have our data here. We have username. Let's say my username is Hezekiah. Then I'll have my password. My password can be test123 at, then my email is whatever at gmail.com. Then my phone number, because if you remember, we also need a phone number. Phone number is equal to whatever, right? So let's send this request now. So you can see this is the user instance that has been returned to us, right? So this is the user instance and this is the token, right? So the registration works correctly. Now I mentioned that we'll be coming back to this password. Now this is a very bad security problem, right? Because if you check on our response, you can see, let me increase this and see. So if you check here, if you check on our response, you see this password as a string, literally, right? Literally returned to us as a string. Now this is very bad. This is very, very wrong, right? You don't want the password returned to the front end, right? Because a user can tamper with it, obviously, right? So let me take this to the normal size, right? So how do we make sure that the password is not returned, right? Because we need this password to create a user and we don't need to show it to the user. Now, if we come back to our serializer that I mentioned, if we come back to our serializers here, under here, we can add quads, extra quads, right? This would be a dictionary, an object in JavaScript. This should be a dictionary, right? So password, and we say read only is equal to 3, right? So if we save this, the server is restarting. Come back here. Let me change my parameters here. This change my phone number. So I guess it's weak. And change my username, right? So I'll make this request. I think I have an error here. Okay. I need to create it. So let me send it again. So you can see that our password is still here. What is the mistake? Let me just increase this. Okay, sorry guys, it's not read only. It's not read only. It is write only. If you think about it, you only want to write it to the database and you don't want to read it, right? You only want to write the password to the database and you don't want to read the password. So let me change this to write only, right? So let's change this to write only. Let me increase my screen. Okay, so if we change this now so that the user will be unique. So if we change this now, send again. So you can see that the password is no longer there, right? So you just come here, add your quags and say the password is write only, not read only, write only. Side note guys, according to YouTube, right, only 6% of our viewers are subscribing. Please guys, if you are not subscribed, please subscribe, like and comment, right? So that you will stay up to date with Django tutorials that we are releasing, right? Not only Django, React Native, right? So we are going in depth on all these stuff. Please like, subscribe and share the video. Thank you. Let's continue, right? So the next thing will be testing the login endpoint. Let me just copy this, right? Copy this, come here, paste this and say login, right? Change this to post, come to my body, go to raw. So I'll just come here, copy this so that my username will be correct and my password will be correct, right? So that the username I created here will be the same username I use here, right? So if I have this, come bring this up and send, right? So you can see the user is also returned here, right? So if I should maybe change the password, use the wrong password, send again, you can see user password is incorrect. And you can see, if you can see here, you can see right here, we have 4 for bad response, right? So but if the username should be correct, I don't know what I changed, you send again, You can see 200. Good response. Okay, right? So now let's go to our test view, right? So on our test view, let me just close this and collapse this. So on our test view, we want to make sure that like this test view will be a protected route, right? We only want authenticated users to be able to access this test view, right? So to add a protection on this view right now, if you go up, you say from REST framework dot permissions, from REST framework dot permissions, we import is authenticated, right? Then we come here and we say permission classes is equal to a list of is authenticated, right? So what are we trying to do? What are we trying to say here? We're saying for us to access this post request here, we need to be authenticated. We need permission class, and that permission class is authenticated. That's to make sure that the user is authenticated, right? So here we just simply send a response right here. Obviously, if we get this response, we know that our API is working. So if we come here, we say message, let's just add anything, log in and as user with this email, right? Let's be able to access the user that is logged in. Let's see if we can be able to access the user that is logged in, right? So to get the user that is logged in, if you in this request dictionary, we also have another parameter which is request.user. So the request.user will contain the user that is logged in, right? It will contain user that is logged, the user instance, right? So you can have access things like email. You can access things like username. You can access things like, for our instance here, for our custom user model, we can access things like phone number, right? So all those good stuff, right? So let's be able to say request user email, right? Just like always, return a status code dot status dot 200, right? So let's save this, go to our URLs to make sure so this is added right now. So if we go to Postman, let me copy this also, go to Postman, let me paste this, change this to post, change this to test. If we send this request now, you can remember there is no authentication, there is nothing like, so you can see we have a message here, have details, authentication credentials were not provided, right? Because we have added this protection here. We have added these permission classes to be is authenticated. So user has to be authenticated to access this API. Now, how do we authenticate a user? Now, if you can remember, we are getting a token here. Let me send this token. We are getting a token here. So if we copy this token, come here. Now, to be able to access a user, right? To be able to authenticate a user, you need that token and you need to pass it into your request headers, right? So if you come under request headers right here, right now, right, you have to have authorization. You see authorization here, authorization. Now, what you have to as the authorization token will be token, literally, right? Token, TOKEN, with a capital T, right? Then you add a space, then you paste the token you got from here, right? So you say authorization, right? Then token is equal to the token you got from this login API. So if you check here, we are not still authenticated. So 9 times out of 10, I'm always forgetting this step. I'm always forgetting this, like I will forget it. I obviously will forget it. If you come to your settings.py file, I have to say REST framework is equal to, right? This should be a dictionary. Then you say default authentication classes, right? Then you say this should be a list, right? then you say rest framework dot authentication dot section authentication, right? Section authentication. We need three types of authentication here. We need section authentication, basic authentication, and token authentication, right? So we need section authentication for token authentication to work. Token authentication, which is what we are trying to do. Then we need basic authentication, is like the basic authentication, like basic authentication. Basic authentication is normal authentication where you need to pass in your password and email. Normal Django authentication, right? So we just add it here just because, right? So after this, you save this, come back here, make the request again. You can see the user is logged in as this user, right? So if we come here, log in as another, you can see that our password here, our email here is MOR. Let me just make this bigger so that you can see it. MORGA10@gmail.com. So let's log in as another user. Let's create another account, right? So let's call this test@gmail.com. Let's change the username to test and change our phone number to something else. Then let's register. Let's remove this token here. I think I have the token here. Remove this token here. Let's register now. So the user is registered. Now let's copy this. Try to log in. Let's also remove this token from here. So log in. So we have the token here, right? So we'll come here, come right here. Let's say maybe we should mess this token up. Like let's like change some things here. If we send it, we will see token is invalid token, right? But we send a correct token, which I just copied from here. This token which I just copied from here, and paste it here, send again. So logged in as test@gmail.com, which is the test user, right? So this is basically it. This is like everything you need to know to get started with token authentication in Django Restframework, right? So in the next tutorial, we'll be looking at section authentication. We'll be looking at using refresh tokens, right? Refresh tokens, which I think is more secure, which I think is better, right? Even though this works for every front-end technology you are using, be it React, Vue, Server, every front-end technology you are using, right? So this works with it. This works perfectly for a basic application. For most of my application, I use this, right? So we also look at refresh authentication just because we can, and summarize, right? So if you are not subscribed again, subscribe, turn up the notification to stay in tune for next videos, and that will be that. Take care of yourself. Make sure you take care of yourself, and have a nice day. Peace.